Robert, I don't think this is very funny. Bobby. Who is this?
As you watch the screen, your heart begins to beat faster. There's a fluttering in the pit of your stomach. Your throat is dry. Your palms damp. Suddenly a chill runs down your spine. You clutch the person next to you. You tell yourself, it's only a movie. It's only a movie. But sooner or later, it's time to go home.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Brian.
And this is our review of A Nightmare on Elm Street, starring John Saxon, Ronnie Blakely, Heather Langenkamp, Amanda Wyss, Nick Corey, Johnny Depp, and Robert Englund. Written and directed by Wes Craven, released in 1984 on a budget of $1.8 million, grossed over $25 million at its box office, and is considered a seminal horror classic, particularly of the slasherdom 80s. And, of course, we're doing this as part of our dueling retrospectives for our almost endless Shocktober this fall, it feels like, Brian. We've got Friday the 13th going on one day of the week, and then we're doing A Nightmare on Elm Street on the other, all culminating in our cage match at Freddy versus Jason at the end. But, you know, Ron wanted to do the Friday the 13th films because they hold a special place for him, and he's got strong memories of them. You were the one that really wanted to do A Nightmare on Elm Street, and if I don't misremember this correctly, this is your favorite of the slasher series, right?
Well, yeah, to be honest, I'm not really versed in the slasher series per se. You know, I've never seen Friday the 13th. I never saw Halloween until we did it. So, I mean, this is just one of those films that, for some reason, the series was good. I watched it. I bought the thing, and yeah. So
when did you first see this?
Oh, a long time ago, probably when I was in middle school. I saw only the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I never saw any of the other ones until probably college. And the wife and I, dating at the time, bought the big set that came out and watched them.
And so, yeah, so your wife is a fan of these as well. So, because I remember she liked some of the Halloweens too, right? So, yeah. You know, for me on this one, I told a little bit of this story last time with when we did Halloween, that I saw Nightmare on Elm Street the same weekend that I saw Halloween for the first time. So if people go back and listen to our first Halloween show, you hear the whole version of that. I won't repeat it here. But I sort of stuck to Halloween, and I remembered Nightmare thinking, yeah, that was really freaky and creepy. And I saw the second one. I think my dad actually liked the Nightmare series, and so we rented the second one when it came out. And then I didn't see any of the other ones until, like you, in college. I finally caught back up to him and said, I've heard people talk about these. They were all done at that point. And so I said, yeah, let me go back and watch these. And in fact, I think I saw New Nightmare before I even saw like 3 through 6. And so, you know, I had
that was common because it had come out late, you know, and it was kind of a big deal when it came out. And so I think a lot of people probably had seen the first Nightmare on Elm Street, maybe the second Nightmare on Elm Street, and had given up after that. And then the new, you know, Freddy Krueger movie comes out and everyone's like, ooh, you know, this looks good. Freddy's Revenge was kind of a big deal too, I think. But yeah.
Well, yeah, that one, I mean, more people talk about Part 3, Dream Warriors, than probably any of the parts here, and we'll get to that one in a few weeks, too, because I definitely have thoughts about it. But I do remember seeing this, though, at, again, one of those pivotal early ages, and it made an impression. It wasn't one that stuck. I told with Ron when we started the Friday the 13th series that on the playground, I felt like, you had to pick your slasher, loyalty or whatever, and I just kind of picked, like, Michael Myers was my guy. I was going to be a Halloween guy, and like Jason to me was sort of the cheap knockoff Michael Myers, so I could tolerate him. Freddy, though, was a game changer because Freddy did something that none of these other ones did. Freddy talked. And even though he doesn't talk a ton in this first film, he does talk, and he has a personality, and he's got a different MO than the rest of them. We could get into that as we go through it. But the other thing is that from the get-go, Freddy is dead. He is not a living, breathing human being the way Jason Voorhees is, Michael Myers, Leatherface, like in Hellraiser, the Hell Priest Pinhead or whatever. Freddy is in another dimension of existence from the beginning. And I do think that's something that sets him apart in the slasher craze.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's kind of a neat twist, and they don't really tell you that until a little later in the film.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like one of those, whoa, you know something's up because the parents, when they hear certain pieces and details, they kind of look freaked out.
Right.
So something's up, and then when mom finally reveals the big secret, it's kind of like, whoa, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a different story. It's kind of the vigilantism gone wrong idea, and in some ways, it makes you kind of get on the killer's side, though they play that differently as the series goes. But I do think that that's something that changes this one, is that he's dead from the start. He has a different backstory than most of the rest of them. And for a large part in this first film, we don't know who he is. I mean, if you had never seen A Nightmare on Elm Street before, didn't have any idea what Freddy Krueger was other than the guy with the sweater and knives on his hands, if you knew that from pop culture, but you didn't know any of the plot and you tried to watch this, for 3/4 of the film, you have no idea who he is. You don't know what he's doing until a big scene, late in the film. That we'll definitely have to talk about. But yeah, I do think that's part of what sets this one apart too, is that it is a mystery as to why he's doing it. It's pretty clear from the get-go in the Friday the 13th movies what's happening. Maybe not that first one, because there's a little bit of a whodunit to that one, but the rest of them are pretty clear. Michael Myers is the killer in Halloween because that's the first thing they show you is him killing someone. And so everything you need to know. Freddy, on the other hand, is an enigma for a large part of his origin film.
He is, and it's a cool little story because you got this guy who they established very early on that he's attacking people in their dreams, and somehow it's coming through to reality, right? At first you're just thinking it's nightmares, then all of a sudden, whoa, things are coming out of the dreams and whatnot. So I think it's kind of a neat little thing that they did there.
Oh, definitely. It gets very layered, and it's an interesting story. It makes for a lot of fun discussion, I'm sure. But I think before we get any further, Brian, we do need to do a plot summary for the uninitiated, and just to get ourselves on the right page. Will you tell folks what A Nightmare on Elm Street is all about?
Absolutely. Several teenagers cross paths with a hideous burned man called Freddy Krueger, who continually stalks them in their dreams, even killing some, which results in their death in the real world. Nancy Thompson learns the horrible truth about Freddy Krueger. He was a child killer let off on a technicality that her and the other victims' parents all banded together to kill in an act of vigilante justice. After Nancy's boyfriend and mother are killed by Krueger, she confronts Freddy and brings him back into her real world, where she turns her back on him, vexed of her fears, which eliminates his powers. She wakes up the next morning to see everything restored. Her mother and friends are alive, and realizes that it was all just a nightmare, until the car she hops into drives away, apparently possessed by Freddy Krueger, who takes her mom once again. So there you go, Jay. That's kind of a weird little plot summary, but that is the bulk of the movie.
I think it's a good plot summary, though, Brian, because I think it's the straight through, if you know nothing else about the series, here's what is laid out in front of you. It's the short version of what happens. Now, how we get there and a couple of conceits that we definitely are going to want to talk about as we get into this. We'll get to, particularly whether or not any of this ever really happens or if it's a nightmare the whole time and all that. We'll talk about. But I want to talk about the opening of this film, because I think the opening of these horror films is always so important. Particularly, I want to contrast it with what you and I have seen together. We saw the Halloween opening together last year, right? And it was, a Halloween night. Well, first we get the pumpkin opening, right? And it's just that weird music and stuff. In this one, you get weird music, and before you get to anything, you see this guy building a glove with knived fingers and some strange imagery and all that. And I wanted to just talk to you first about, what do you make of the weapon here, the weapon of choice, the knived glove?
Well, I think it's interesting, and I kind of was hoping that they'd expound on why he chose the weapon that he did, but I don't think they really do. And I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen all of the Freddy Kruegers. I'm not sure if they actually ever do, but it's a cool weapon of choice. I mean, who would have thought that you would take knives, weld them together with some, finger clamps and put them on the end of a torn up glove. Like, he cuts off the fingers of the glove so that it can grip his fingers when he's doing the killing. Yeah. It's definitely a effective weapon. You could do so many different things with it. Gut people, slash them, all sorts of stuff. So very interesting. I'd never seen anything like that before.
I can tell you the thing that I've always thought about this, and years later had it confirmed that was the backstory. I always felt like if that's your weapon of choice, then these kills are something where it's so personal for you to have a touch with the people that you kill, that I thought immediately, like, this guy was probably like a child molester. And indeed, they call him a child murderer in the film, but in the original script, he was a child molester who also killed the children. And when they were finally putting this together and budgeting it, they just realized that, there was no way that this was going to get released in 1984 if they, went that route. Even after Craven had done that deplorable Last House on the Left thing 12 years earlier, he learned there's no way they're ever going to let that out. So they bury that part of this story. It's brought up in later sequels. I do seem to remember that because they loosen up on it a little bit. But in this first one, he's just relegated to child killer. But I've always associated with the fact that he was a child molester, and that the killing is part of that evil touch thing or whatever. And it makes the character that much more deplorable and creepy. I mean, as if you had to need a reason to hate this guy and, not root for the killer anymore, there's another one. And maybe that was another reason they cut it. But I've always associated the glove with that tendency about the character.
Yeah, interesting. I never really thought of it that way. I think it's a good thought and a good thought. And I didn't actually know that he ended up being a child molester. So that's a cool tidbit that I missed.
It's it's one of those things that I only know because I've read enough of the behind-the-scenes stuff and have heard Craven and company talk about it. When I first saw it, I didn't know that. I just thought that he must have gotten something from that ability to, be up close and personal. I also think, too, it's only the kind of weapon that someone who is pretty much indestructible would ever want to do, because think about how impractical that is. I mean, you could hurt yourself as much as you can hurt anyone else, and think about how close you have to get to people to kill them.
You have to be real close. You have to be able to basically reach out and grab them, and there's no other way to do it. You can't really throw your gloved knives because they'll just flop.
Think about it, contrast it with like Michael Myers and Jason in particular, since we're talking about Jason right now on the other series. They hide in the shadows and stab you with stuff, with knives and things like that, but they can still sort of keep their distance. Freddy gets right up on you, and moreover, he wants to, because that's the whole opening here is it's a nightmare, and we open up on a nightmare. And I think that's an important thing to note, is that these films generally start on a nightmare, and we open up on a nightmare for our character Tina here. And if you didn't know better, again, watching the first 20 minutes of this movie, if you didn't know anything about it, you'd think Tina was the main character, because we open up on her instead of Nancy or any of the others.
Yeah, definitely. The cast characters is very interesting, and it's been a long time since I watched it, so it was kind of cool to go back and refresh my memory on some of these people and what went on. But yeah, it's a good way to start, and it does throw you for a little bit of a loop, because we aren't introduced to our main characters right away. We're introduced to a side character who's still important in the story, because she ends up being the first one getting killed. But it was kind of weird that we didn't start with Nancy, since the crux of the whole episode is her battle here.
Well, I mean, if you're to read this film the way that Craven intends for you to, this whole thing is Nancy's nightmare. It's a nightmare inside of a nightmare inside of a nightmare. It's Inception, but it's the whole thing is her nightmare. But we open up on the POV of another character, so it makes that conceit a little tough to swallow in some ways. But in other ways, it's part of the, I guess you'd say, the smart part of this film is that the way it opens up. And I like the fact that her dreams are so intense that like she rips open her own nightgown with her fingernails. But what we really know is that Freddy did that to her. And she woke up right before he could kill her. And I thought, well, now, what a great place for the killer to be able to operate, because that's one of the conceits about these horror movies, right, is that the killer always seems to be wherever he needs to be when he needs to be, right? Well, in a dream world, he really can be that. He can be everywhere. He can do all of these weird things with the sheep and then disappear and jump in behind her. And I thought that whole opening was really effective. Like, I've seen this movie a lot. I haven't seen it in several years, but I remember sitting and watching this, and I was kind of in a dark room by myself, and I actually jumped on that scare. I said, okay, that one's pretty good. That actually got a jump out of me.
I actually jumped this time too, but that's funny. But I like it too, and I really like the idea of going with Tina's dream, because it establishes that it's all related to the dreams, right? I mean, Nancy has the same type of dream. She has the same type of dream. We find out that Johnny Depp's character has the same type of dream, and even
Rod.
Rod has the same type of dream as well.
Talk about a fake porn star name, Rod Lane. I mean, and I feel bad for the actor. I don't know his real name. I apologize for that. Nick Corey isn't even his real name. Like, he was going by that at the time in Hollywood because it's how he could get work. But anyway, it's just funny to hear him talk about it now and stuff. But no, it's a different universe to operate in. And the one thing I'll say is that they do introduce us to these characters, and they get right to it. Like, there's no waste of time on really setting them up. They're friends. They're walking to school the next day, and Tina's telling Nancy about her freaky dream, and later on that night, they'll realize they dreamed about the same guy. And then Johnny Depp's like, yeah, and then Rod later, after the really loud sex with Tina, which I can only imagine the actors like behind the door, like, let's see how stupid we can sound, because it is so funny.
And it's just a weird, because he's looked at as kind of a gross guy, right? At the beginning, they're walking, he comes out,
he's a jerk
on Tina, and she's like, oh, get away, gross, ew, and then she ends up boning him.
I know, it's like, it's like, no more fights here, no more. I'm like, yeah, of course you would go for the bad guy. I love Johnny Depp's line too, like, morality sucks, or something like that, which is
morality sucks,
which is hilarious. But they're all there together. The one thing though is that I'll say is I'm glad I'm being grabbed by the story and what they're doing, because one thing is very evident. Now, I've never seen this in a theater, so I don't know if the theatrical experience would make it different. But the acting here and the dialogue and stuff is awful. It is bad. It is just as bad as anything in those Friday films. I put it as bad as some of that, girl-to-girl talk in that first Halloween when they were walking around, totally and all that crap. It's pretty bad. You got to admit, it's not really good.
It doesn't bother me like Last House on the Left did. That was just pure garbage.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because we watched that this wasn't as offensive.
I think maybe there was a method to that madness after all.
It could be, but I wasn't too. I mean, it's not great dialogue, absolutely not. But it felt more real to me than that other garbage did, so it wasn't too bad.
I think the thing that gets me, and you and I are saying the same things here, is that these people, while their performances aren't great, the story's intriguing me enough, because if I'm just going with it, trying to watch it and say, well, what is going on, and how weird would that be to realize that you and two of your friends are having the same dreams about the same guy? Why is that happening? It's never explained, and so that's why it's so weird, and it lends to the it lends to that theory again that, this is all Nancy's dream and Nancy's nightmare and stuff like that. But I don't know. I liked it. It doesn't take me out of it, but I did notice that they were bad performances. But again, I'm going with it, and I'm intrigued enough that I don't mind it. But it had to be pointed out. Like, I don't want us to go this whole podcast and people to listen going like, these people think these people act well, because like they don't.
No,
they're not. Yeah. Johnny Depp gets a lot better in his career. So, but
thank God, right?
I guess I've never been a Depp fan, so I don't really care.
He got a little weird, but there's some good Depp movies out there.
A little weird. He's a lot weird, dude.
The Pirates of the Caribbean stuff is fun.
That
and
that
the
first
window
one
is fun.
That first one is fine. The rest of them I would argue are completely
the
pointless.
second one's terrible. The third one gets a little better.
See, you're better. You made it to the third one. I never did. So
I made it through all of them, man.
Well, you know, that may be a retrospective in our future.
The
so.
kids really liked it, so we sat
I
down
think-
and watched them all.
I think that's the point. Yes, it's definitely for them. So I did enjoy the Pirates of the Caribbean ride though quite a bit. But at any rate,
was
back to Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, let's talk about the sleepover. So we have
yes.
a sleepover. They go out and they get all their sex on, and everyone's
Tina and Rod get their sex on.
Right. That's
Yeah, Johnny Depp and Nancy. Johnny Depp sleeps on the couch.
Sucks.
Yeah,
So no sex for them.
Yeah, and Nancy just wears a long T-shirt. So,
Right.
but we got to mention though the way that Rod gets there is he sneaks up on him at the house and like he pulls a switchblade on Johnny Depp and all this, and I'm like, wow, it's like a scene out of The Outsiders, but not nearly as poignant. You know, it's like I wouldn't do that for Johnny. No, it wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Anyway, so after the sex scene or whatever you want to call it, the
scene that was, by the way, it wasn't like that was filmed and they cut it and just went with the sound. They never even intended to show that because they had already figured out we're going to be lucky we get this thing past the rating.
Well, you can't show that. They're all supposed to be underage, so
exactly right.
That would be a bad idea. Let's talk about the dream. First and foremost, Jay, and I sent this to you in a text as I was watching this. Tina is in her dream again, right? And all of a sudden she's hearing a voice calling her name. So
Right.
you hear a creepy voice calling your name, and what do, Jay? Of course, you go try to find it. Why wouldn't you?
without putting on any clothes, I might add.
Well,
So-
no, you don't need that. We're
Yeah.
just looking for the creepy voice calling your name because that's logic.
Hey, it's the 80s. It was a more innocent time, man. That's all I can think. Like I had to put myself back in this mode. Like, who on earth would go outside if there was a weird noise? But you know what? If I hear a weird noise now, I jump up, I put pants on, and then I do go to the door to see what's going on. So I don't hear any names calling me at night. Thankfully, I might not chase after that, but I do think it's part of that, and I think that's a dream sequence too. It's all part of the dreamscape. Is that in a dream you might do things that you wouldn't do in your regular life because subconsciously your body knows you're in a dream or whatever. That's the creepy thing about Freddy. And the way he comes after her with the stretchy arms, and he cuts his friggin' fingers off in front of her, and all that stuff, which is a creepy effect, but a bad one nonetheless. but the intent is right, is to creep her out to the fact that he is this unstoppable force chasing her in her dreams, and he is like screwing with her before he kills her. He doesn't just want to stab her and gut her.
Well,
he's gonna.
This is a trademark of Freddy Krueger as well.
Yes,
he does like to play with his food.
Yes, he does. He plays with her a long time before he kills her, and then my goodness, that kill, man, is friggin' intense. I mean, and I know it's cut to heck and back because they had to cut so much of it with, the MPAA and stuff like that, but it's still really effective the way she's drug across the ceiling, even if that's ripped off out of Poltergeist and a few other things. I think it's great, and she ends up in a bloody heap on that bed. It's an evocative scene. I mean, it got a reaction out of me even this time, having seen it a few times. I was like, I did not remember it being that gory.
No, and neither did I. And I was like, wow, did Rob Zombie redirect this or something? Because this is like Blood City. And even afterwards, when the cops are there picking up and you got the just pools of blood dripping from the ceiling and everywhere, that was pretty darn gory of a kill scene for this series.
It's a butchering, but I have to say it's that way because of when it came out. 1984, and it was being shot in 83, but coming out in 84, the fourth Friday the 13th film was going to be in theaters that year, and the gore stakes had been raised since then. Halloween had done parts 1 and 2, and 2 was much gorier than the first one. All the rip-off slashers in between, My Bloody Valentine, April Fool's Day, all of those things had come out, and the gore had been the thing that made them separate themselves. And so many of those other series and films don't have the stories to go with them, and that's why they didn't turn into big series and things like that. So Craven knew we got to have the gore here, but it's got to serve a point. And what he was able to do was put the mystery and suspense of Freddy Krueger in with all of the Tom Savini like gore effects, but without, some of that touch, but some of that same idea is we've got to have the blood to go with it, because otherwise people won't be afraid of this guy unless you see what those finger knives can do. And it's Fleet was 20 minutes into it, and we see the damage those things can actually do.
Yeah, and it was pretty good. I mean, I like how I don't want to say I like how it did, but I thought it was well done, because he basically starts with the 4 nail scratches, and then just it all goes apart. And of course, yeah. Rod is sitting there helpless. He can't see what's attacking her. He's just looking around like, what can I do? Can I try to do anything? He gets shoved away by an invisible force, and it basically has to sit there and watch his sex toy get destroyed.
Well, his girlfriend,
I don't think they were actually boyfriend girlfriend. But.
Well, his conquest for the night, then, if you want to go that way, or whatever, his girl for the moment, it's somebody he knows. He's had a relationship with her, and they,
fairly
he has to,
recently.
Yeah, well, yeah, they've had relations recently, but we are led to believe they have a relationship and have had one on and off, and so he sees this go down, and what I thought was interesting was how Nancy and Glenn, Johnny Depp's character, break into the room, and like Depp's reaction is perfect. I mean, he just is like frozen in his tracks when he sees that, and he just stops, and like Nancy's just completely frozen from all of that gore there. And what's missing is Rod. Rod has just hightailed it the hell out of there, because he knows he is going to be suspect number one, and indeed he is the only suspect that the cops and the adults in town seem to be interested in pursuing for this when it comes down to it. And I mean, they've set him up for it from the beginning. He messes around by scaring Johnny Depp in the garden with that 3-pronged gardening tool, and then he's got the switchblade and all this stuff. And even if you think logically, there's no way a guy with one knife could do that to somebody, but he's the most obvious suspect too.
And they even call that out, I think, in the station with the cops.
Yeah.
There were 4 knives, like, perfectly aligned here. I don't know how one switchblade can cause it, right? They call that out later. But, yeah, he's on the run. I mean, I think it's partially because he knows he's going to get the blame for this, but also because he's scared to death. He just saw this girl get just mutilated in front of him. He's probably thinking he's next.
And by something he can't see. That's the other thing. At no time does he know, even though like we see Tina wrestling under the covers with Freddy, he doesn't see Freddy, because presumably it's not his nightmare. In fact, it's Nancy's nightmare for Tina. But if we're to believe it is happening in the real world, it's Tina's nightmare coming true, and it's very strange and it's off-putting, and it puts him out. And Rod is the key suspect, and I do have to laugh at, John Saxon and Ronnie Blakely are the adults here who play Nancy's parents or whatever. And Ronnie Blakely, I think, won an Oscar earlier in her career. Saxon's been a guy that I've seen in a lot of movies. He was in like Bruce Lee films and stuff. I'm sure you've seen him play cops and other things here and there. He's a good character actor to know. I love that the way they play against each other, because oftentimes when you got parents that are separated from one another, like they overplay the tension between them about that, and they really don't here. I'll give them both credit for keeping that really subtle, and that you realize that there's a lot of reasons they're not together anymore, and as we'll learn, one of which is the fact that they conspired to murder someone and cover it up.
Right. Yeah. I got the feeling that their divorce was more not out of no love anymore type situation. There was more emotional scarring type.
Right. Like they had there was just something that had screwed up along the way for them, and that's indeed what it was.
And I think a lot of it might have to do, it's your typical cop relationship, right? Your cop.
Right.
And then the wife's always at home, cop's always on duty type thing. I think that had a lot to do with it too.
That too. And I mean, she's an alcoholic and all this stuff. But this is the other thing about Nightmare as a series that makes it different. The parents are a part of the story. They are involved in it. And that's a knock on a lot of these slasher films, right? It's where the heck are all the parents? In Halloween, they just didn't have any budget for the the cast, so that they weren't there. In Friday the 13th, yeah, in Friday the 13th, they're all at camp, so that's how you get away with no parents. They do introduce a parent or two here and there, but they're really largely not a part of this story going forward. At Nightmare on Elm Street, the parents of Springwood are part of the story here. They are part of everything. Yeah, and you know what? I say that's one of the things that makes this series differentiate from its counterparts, is the fact that parents are an integral part of the story. I don't think you could tell this without them. I don't think it would have been enough if like the older siblings of Nancy and Glenn and all that had banded together and killed Freddy, because then he would just come back and kill them. Freddy specifically is here to kill the children of the parents who killed him.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting twist, right? I mean, he's a child murderer for one, and when we finally reveal this, it's he was killing the children of these families, you know. So these parents weren't kids at the time that they killed him, right? They were adults, and some of them had children who were being killed by Freddy Krueger, and they all banded together.
And that's a deleted scene in that part where Mom is telling Nancy in the boiler room of their house where she's got Freddy's glove how they killed him. She tells Nancy, "You weren't always an only child." So that that her and Glenn and Tina all had older siblings who were killed by Freddy at some point. And and they cut that. And I've always, when I found out that existed, I thought that should have stayed, because that makes it even that much more impactful.
More personal, too.
Exactly. It's these parents lost children in this, and you lost siblings because of this. I would have left that in, but they don't have that in there. But you know what? Even so, I think you could almost infer that just from watching this, that these people had lost children as a part of this. Elsewise, why would they have gotten involved? Like, it's one thing to like be activists and be, really upset about something going on in your community, but unless it happens to you, I would have had a hard time buying that these parents decided, on behalf of all these other parents that have lost children, I'm going to go murder someone. I think it's more important that they had to lose something in the game too. And that's the other thing too. The parents here, Tina's parents are divorced. Nancy's parents are pretty much divorced. Glenn's parents are jerks. And Rod doesn't have any parents that we know of. So, I mean, you see the damage that it's done to these families over the years, because I don't think we get a firm timeline as to when that happened, but it had to have happened, a good time ago for none of these kids to remember another sibling. So at least 10, 15 years, Yeah. So in that amount of time, these people's lives have been destroyed by that action. And I like the fact that there were consequences to that, and we're seeing the effects of those consequences playing out.
Absolutely. And we talk about, as we mentioned here, Nancy's dad is the lead cop on this story.
Yeah.
And the mom, once she finds out, basically Nancy keeps telling things about what the dreams are about, and mentioning little tidbits about the killer in the dreams, and she knows right away what's going on. She puts bars on all the windows and doors.
Yeah.
Funny.
She goes nuts at the home security store or whatever.
As if that's going to help.
Well, I mean, I remember watching this going like, well, that would be real good if The Purge was coming, but I don't know if it's going to help you any against Freddy. But
exactly.
But no, but I like, she's doing everything she can. The only thing she can do to control her own emotions is drink. So she's pretty well half sauced the whole time, right? That's what we're led to believe.
I think that's just to numb things, not to even control her own emotions, because she's not controlling them very well.
No,
she's just trying to forget. Or
that's what I'm saying. She is just trying to sort of coast through life until some point that she can never see the end of. That's what she thinks. And even so, like, she tries to be an authority figure in her daughter's life, but Nancy is pretty much kind of on her own. I mean, the day after her friend gets butchered, she goes to friggin' school, and like both of her parents are like, "Why are you at school?" And Nancy's like, "No, I want to be there." And they give into that. And I'm like, my parents, if something like that had happened and I had been witness to it, it wouldn't have mattered if I'd wanted to go to school or if I had a test or not. They would have not let me out of the house. Yeah. But the fact that her mom can't stop her leads me to believe that this has been a long time, that Nancy's kind of grown herself up in a lot of ways. She parents herself in a lot of ways.
True, but I'm going to say, as a person who went through a trauma-like situation similar to this, the one thing you want is to go back to real life as soon as possible, because it takes your mind off of it.
True.
So I can understand Nancy wanting to go to school. I wouldn't want to sit there cooped up in a house all day, just sitting there thinking about this the whole time. I would rather have the distraction. Now, her problem is she hasn't slept in X days, and that's not going to help when you're sitting in a school situation. But yes, I understand
and
want.
listening to Hamlet or whatever, I do love though how things change and you realize she's fallen asleep in class and is in a dream
when the story changes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like the guy that's up there reading in front of class, like it becomes like sepia tones behind him or something, and he starts whispering in this weird voice. It's almost like Cobra Commander walked in and started lecturing or something.
And he changes the story into
he starts reading some weird stuff. And this, you texted me the great moment with the hall monitor in the hall there. Screw your pass.
That was part of her dream, right?
Yes, it was. But I love that though. It was great because she hears something in the hallway and she sees a body bag of Tina dragging itself along the hall. I'm like, how freaky is that, man?
Gross, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And it doesn't realize she's in a dream yet. She's chasing Tina all over the place, trying to figure out what's going on. The hall monitor's there. Screw your hall pass. Great line.
Well, but the hall monitor is just Freddy screwing with her. So that's the other thing
absolutely.
is not only can Freddy morph his own shape, but he can just be other people too in the dream.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, you know what? That makes total sense for a dream demon. I mean, I like that though, that they gave him that power, and they can't show all this mass morphing and stuff because they don't have the budget for it. But holy cow, did they not do a great job of working that in with that hall pass character?
And what I like about it is that they give you a hint that it's him by having something that you would recognize, like the green and red colors, or
the sweater, exactly.
Anything that by looking at it, that's Freddy.
It's a conceit that Stephen King's It borrows with its main villain too, and that they showed up in that TV movie of it doing, but it's all through the book too. Is that it could be all these things, and I don't, Stephen King wrote that over a number of years, and I'm certain he and Craven weren't trading notes, but it's neat that they both kind of have the same idea for their villain in the story there, because they're shapeshifters, and I like it. I like the thing, and I love though that this is. Freddy is going to kill her now because he's got her asleep. And, I mean, he's got her in the boiler room, and Nancy has the brilliant idea of, I'm going to burn my arm so it'll wake me up. She has to do something to wake herself up. And I made a little note to myself. I said, if she doesn't do that right there, does Freddy kill her and then she just burst into blood in the middle of her class? Talk about traumatizing a whole town. That would have been nuts. And not like it's bad enough. She wakes up screaming with the teacher in her face going, what's wrong? And she's got a burnt arm now.
Yeah, and then of course the teacher says you're going to need a hall pass.
Of course, yeah. I mean,
she's leaving.
We have to pay off that line once again. So you don't need a hall pass for this podcast, folks.
No hall pass.
But,
So she's gone, and what does she want to do? She wants to go make sure that Rod's okay, right?
Right. So she goes to see him in jail.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So she's want to go see him in jail, and I love how Rod spills it all out for her, and she can't believe it, even though she's experienced this herself. She's still having a hard time reconciling all of this in her own head, right?
Yeah, and understandably so. I mean, it's pretty gruesome and pretty wild, and the last person with her was Rod, so you got to reconcile everything in your head.
She's actively dismissing what she just went through as it's just because of all this that's happened to me that I'm having these weird dreams now. That's why she goes to see Rod. And then when he lays it on her, it makes her stop and go, wait a minute, what's happening here? And she's still so confused.
And rightly so, right? I mean, because for her, this guy's just been chasing her around to kill her with his knives. To Rod, this guy has supernatural powers where he can, be invisible and drag someone around a ceiling and everywhere which way he wants and have his way with them.
Exactly. Rod's seen the damage he can do. Nancy's just dreamed about him and knows that she's having the same dreams her friend had before she was killed, and she realizes this guy is after me. He's after all of us. And then, Nancy and Glenn go on this little quest to try to learn the truth, to try to figure out what happened. And that's when we learn Glenn's been having the dreams too, and they can't get anywhere. No one will listen to them. And I think that's a common horror trope. But in this case, the twist of it is that the parents actually know what the problem is. Like, they have no reason not to believe this. They just don't want to admit it. And they can't believe that there's no way he's back from the dead. We
that's
killed
the part
him.
Right there. I mean, they know about Freddy Krueger, but they think that they're just making stuff up.
Right, but they're wondering how do these kids know who that is? Because not only I get the sense that there were these group of people that killed him and that one of the cops in town was in on it, so that's how they were able to get away with it. But it's like they've erased him from existence in town. They can't find out anything about him anywhere because nobody's saying anything. It's like it's in another Stephen King kind of turn. It's like the whole town decided best left not discussed ever again. And it's that dark secret they won't talk about. And I like that, though. I think our adult actors here, Ronnie Blakely and John Saxon, do sell us on that, even though it's a little cheesy the way that they do it. I like the fact that it's a little cheesy and it's a little melodramatic because they have to be going, how in the H did that come back up to bite us? We thought we had burned and buried that, years ago.
Right. Yeah, and they're, I think, trying to come to terms with it too. Like, how can this, like you said, how can this even happen? How is it possible that my kids are knowing about this child murder that we took care of? I thought we buried that, right? And it makes sense that they would hide the history from the town because of what they did.
I know. I mean, and look at how Nancy and Glenn try to do this. Nancy tells Glenn, you stay awake, and if I look like I'm freaking out, you wake me up. And she lays down to try to sleep because she's going to try to find out a little bit more about Freddy in the dream world because they're getting nowhere in the real world. And friggin' Glenn goes to sleep anyway. And
they're all tired.
And I love how Nancy just, you shit, how dare you go to sleep on me? And I just thought, man, poor Glenn, he can't get a break with this girl at all. And there's no way, he could have done anything right in that moment. And she should have known he was asleep too, because she's like, are you still there? And he pops out from behind the bush in the dream. I thought that was great. So
exactly.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm right here.
I was like, well, what did she do? Did she bring him into the dream?
Right.
Like the dream rules are something we do need to pay attention to because it's not gonna be the last time we have to discuss that in one of these podcasts. I do remember that distinctly, but no, they can't get anywhere with that. So they decide we got to go and see Rod at the jail again. So they go down there to see him again, and little known to them, Freddy is there, invisible. And he makes the sheet tie around, and Rod hangs himself, basically, which I thought was, even for as cheesy as it is, was a really effective looking effect and pretty ferocious.
Well, and it gets the cops kind of off of the trail, right? Because they think he killed the girl, right?
And killed himself, right?
And so he killed himself because of the guilt. So now they don't need to look for anything else. So it's a brilliant way for Freddy Krueger to take out Rod, because now it looks like he felt guilty and did it.
Yeah, and I used to sit around and wonder, why would Freddy, make it look like suicide? Why does he care? It's not that the cops can come after him. I'm like, no, wait a minute, this is perfect, because then they won't pay attention to anything else that's going on. They're not going to listen to these kids.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. He can just go back to doing what he wants. And I love that it's, by the way, at a very awkward funeral scene where the minister is talking about living and dying by the sword and all of that would be true, but probably wrong time and place to be having that discussion in front of people at the graveside service with Rod's parents and everybody there, which I assume those people with the guy with the dark Elvis hair was Rod's dad or something. We don't know, but
good question.
Yeah,
probably it would make sense.
It would, right? But you've got his few friends there, or whatever, the cops there, and I love how Nancy is the one that says, "Dad, Fred Krueger is the one that did this," and he and Ronnie Blakely get that look again, like, "Holy cow!" And I love her line is. He's like, keep her at home for a few days, and she's like, better than that, I'm going to go get her some help. And who knew? Good old Springwood, Ohio here has a sleep clinic.
Everyone does, right?
Yeah, right. I guess so. Well, nowadays, yeah, but 1980s? Okay. So, I have done the sleep study thing a couple of times. I don't mind saying it's a very weird place. They hook up a lot more crap to you than that, but it's about the same. It's a lot of people standing around watching you sleep, and you're laying there trying to rest while you're hooked up to a lot of machines. It's an awkward place to try to rest. Yeah. But I do like the fact that Mom, again, is being active, and we get this moment where we watch her start dreaming. Now, I don't know a lot about the science of dream studies and all that kind of stuff. I assume all of this is just, crap and mumbo jumbo. Like, yeah, she would be reading a 6 if it was a nightmare now, or whatever. And the machine starts freaking out. But the part of the scene that I love is the fact that we don't even know what's happening to her. We don't know what she's dreaming, what she's nightmaring about. We just see the effects of it on this side of the fence. And I think that's cool that they didn't shoot something and flash us back and forth. I think nowadays it would cut back and forth.
More than likely, yes. And I agree. I think it was brilliant that they didn't do that, because the whole point of the scene is the sleep doctor being baffled at what's going on and trying to figure out what's going on because he'd never seen anything like it. And I think that was the point of that scene.
Exactly, right? But at the end of it is she comes back with a prop. She's got Freddy's dirty little brown hat, his fedora. She brought it out of her dream, and she's got that one white streak in her hair, so she's kind of gone X-Men rogue, with that. Mm-hmm. And that's the effect of the dream. And I thought, holy cow, the looks on all the adults' faces when she pulls that hat up are great, because they're like, where did you get that? And I thought, yeah, I'd be like, I'm putting in for transfer. This clinic is, no, we're bringing stuff out of the dreams now. Like, that's like Leprechaun 3 level crazy now. Like, that's nuts.
Nothing's Leprechaun 3 level crazy, buddy. But I think it's interesting because they think she brought it in, right? The sleep doctors think she brought it in.
Yeah, I'm just like, stuck it where? She was in a gown when you saw her.
Right. How'd you confiscate that and get that in here? But
exactly.
Yeah, it was an interesting piece, and I think this is where Mom finally realizes something to what her daughter's been saying. She's not just a nut.
Right. Yeah, there's something else going on here, and that's what leads her to the truth. I mean, her and Nancy have a fight, and have had one before, and she says, come on, I'll show you something. She takes her downstairs, and then we get the whole, he's dead because Mommy killed him. And I thought, what a great line, and what a freaky line, too, because Nancy, and Heather Langenkamp, a lot of people like to bang on her acting and stuff like that. I actually think she's not that bad in this, and particularly this scene, I think she plays it perfect, because she's getting confirmation for everything she's already figured out at this point, but it's so much worse than what she could have imagined. She had no idea, and she's looking at him like, what? You did what to this guy? And that's why he's trying to kill me now? And I thought that was fantastic, and is a great reveal, and it's a surprise too, because it's the beginning of the third act. It's not the end. We spring the big surprise, the big twist is here, and then you get the rest of the film with that knowledge in your back pocket.
Yeah, what I really liked about the scene too is that she kept the knives. Like, she kept his glove.
Yeah, why would you do that?
Well, I guess you wanted a souvenir. But good question. And if he burned in the thing, how did that survive?
Yeah, I'm like, that means you guys went in there and got the body out. Well, they had to. They had to go hide it, right? Yeah, I mean,
not only that, they wanted to make sure it was dead.
Right.
Right. 'Cause, I mean, this guy was a nightmare to them too.
True. A living nightmare. Yeah. Exactly. So, but I mean, that does layer so much with the parents. You're like, there's a good prequel to be made just about the parents and what they went through.
You know what? And that's a good thing. I wish they would do that prequel.
I wish they had. The only time they've come near it, Brian, is
the new one.
Well, no, actually, it's not even that. Freddie had a TV show called Freddy's Nightmares. It was out around the same time as the Friday the 13th TV series. I don't know if you've ever seen this thing. It's on the El Rey network from time to time. I know you and I are both Sling TV guys, so you can see it there. If you ever want to watch any of it, you can. There's one episode, probably done in a sweeps thing, where they did the backstory of it, but they did it on a budget of like $5,000. So you don't see. I'm like, it doesn't help. It doesn't tell you anything. I'm with you. That would have been a film I thought at some point they would get to, and I really thought the remake would do. They don't really do that to spoil that ahead of time.
They do a little bit. I mean, a little better than these films do in the remake.
Yeah.
I thought, at least they give you more of a backstory anyway.
They do. They go into more of it, but I'm with you. This is the kind of thing that I'm like, I don't want you to tell me that now, but that would be neat if one of these sequels we got some of that, because that's the kind of backstory that's like, holy cow, that's interesting. Like, for all the stuff that could be said about Rob Zombie's take on Halloween and all that stuff, in large part, there's so much of that like unravels the mystique of the Michael Myers character that it kind of ruins it in some ways. Not totally ruins it, but it takes away some of the mystery. I'm always worried when we get too much backstory, like that it's going to be bad. But in this case, I think it would actually help a ton and would be compelling to see what drove those parents to this point. Well, we know what drove them to it. Just to watch them go through it, the drama of it would be good entertainment. It could be, yeah, but we don't get that. Instead, we get Nancy and Glenn talking about the Balinese way of dreaming, where they basically they basically decide I'm going to be a total BA in my dreams, or if it's so bad, what if I create a monster? Well, they just turn their back on it, and I'm like, I had never caught the line that Glenn basically gives her the way out at the end of the film in that line. I'd never realized that that's where that comes from. Yeah, I had missed that all these years. I knew they talked about like all the Ramboing up stuff, and like she gets into survival and all that crap, but I did not realize he gave her that little line. But I'm like, man, that's a great little drop. They just kind of dropped that in there in that little park, and then here we go.
I tell you what I thought when I first saw it, and I caught that line right away, and I said that would be the lamest thing ever.
Only to realize 15 minutes later you were going to see exactly that. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, but before we get to that, we do get what is undoubtedly one of the most visually memorable scenes of this film, and that's Glenn's death. Nancy's going to go to sleep. He's like, whatever you do, do not go to sleep. She can't get him back on the phone because his parents are jerks and all this stuff. And, well, actually, they don't want people calling their house at midnight. I'm getting old enough now where I can side with that. But in this case, I'm like, no, they're made to be jerks. So they're jerks.
And they believe she's nuts, right?
Yes, and they do talk crap about her, even though they were in on this too. So, they know what's up. That's the thing is you watch this having known now what Ronnie Blakely has said, you realize Glenn's parents know what's up too. They were probably there holding a pitchfork. Like they know. They're just trying to fire, exactly. Yeah, they're just trying to be, upstanding Republican Reagan parents at the time or whatever. And so they're sitting over there drinking their beer and coffee. And meanwhile, Glenn is doing something that I thought no one in the real world did until I started paying attention to my teenage brother, who would go to sleep watching television but with his headphones on all the time.
I see that.
Yeah, and I'm like, I did that too when I was in high school. I don't know, it's a thing, but the
you
way
couldn't play your music back then. I mean, there was no other way to do
right,
it. Your parents would get pissed if you had the music on, so you always put the headphones on.
Exactly, and I love how he gets sucked into the bed, and everything goes in with him, and then what comes out is a geyser of just gore and blood, like right out of the elevator scene in The Shining.
No, and of course, Mom comes in and is horrified at the sight. To me, I didn't like this kill. I thought it was kind of stupid. It wasn't my thing. I didn't like that he got sucked into the bed the way he did and all that. To me, it was just kind of a lame one.
I like the fact that it happened and we don't see what happens to him. Like, the thing I've always wondered, and what I'm told, is that it's supposed to be more than just Glenn's blood getting splattered on the walls or whatever.
Well,
that's
have to be, because that's a lot.
That's what Craven says, and apparently that's what he used to get it by the MPAA. Whatever. The point is that I remember seeing that and going, what could cause that? Like, the only thing at that point that I had seen that did anything close to that was Jaws. When the shark kills the little boy at the beach, there's like this huge geyser of blood that shoots out of nowhere, and then it's gone.
Blood and water.
Right? Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. That's blood and water. This is like we took Mr. Kool-Aid and just turned him upside down on everybody. I mean, that's what I thought at the time. I was blown away by just how incredible the scene was without being overly gory. I mean, that much blood is gory, don't get me wrong, but we don't see like parts coming with it. There's not brain matter in there with it. We don't get every bone crunch that happened with it like Rob Zombie would give you for an example. It just happens. And it's so
be
freaky.
More realistic, and it wouldn't be that much of a geyser.
Well, see, here's the thing though, and this is what I have to keep reminding myself, but in a dream, and particularly in a nightmare, it can be anything. And what we are watching is a nightmare. And I thought, that is a nightmarish scene. I get it. I buy it now. And I thought it was effective. The kill that I think is incredibly lame is the mom's death. Can we talk about what happens there? Because Nancy chases around with Freddy and sets him on fire. And so the stuntman does double time work going up and down the stairs on fire, by the way. That was great work by him. But eventually he winds up on mom's bed smoking with her, and then like it becomes like talking about old rides at Disney, like the old Haunted Mansion or something, man. She the blue lights and the little arm, and I'm like, what happened here? I don't get it.
Yeah, I didn't quite get it either, to be honest with you. It was an interesting. I like the whole burning Freddy thing because that throws us back to what happened to him, right? He was.
Yeah, he even says like no when she lights him on fire, and I thought,
Right.
wait a minute, you're an indestructible dream demon, but I thought, but even for you, this
But
has
he
to
has
be
a fear too. Because he
uncomfortable.
died,
Yeah,
right. He died from fire, and I
Exactly.
like that her death comes at the hands of a burning Freddy because she's the one who helped put him on fire in the first place. But
right.
yeah,
You kind of get the sense that Marge was the one that maybe threw the first Molotov cocktail or something.
even if she wasn't, I mean, just it's symbolic that here's a burning Freddy that you killed by fire coming to kill you now. And I actually
Exactly.
liked that piece, but the rest of it was definitely bizarre.
Well, I mean, it looks bad. That's the thing is, it's just so cheesy that it just doesn't work. I mean, it just looks bad. And I imagine this is all we've got. We're just going to go with
I
it.
got
So
$10.
just-
Let's just get this.
Yeah,
over with.
really. I mean, it's you and I could recreate this effect now for about $40 probably, but it works enough. But here's the thing too, and this again leads me to be on the side of Wes Craven, which I don't really want to be in this film, but that all of this is a dream because Dad witnesses this with her. The other detective comes upstairs and I put the fire out downstairs, and Dad and the other cop just sort of about face and leave the room. And Nancy's like, I'm just going to stand here and deal with this now. And I'm like, well, that's why this is a dream, because you dismiss the characters you don't want in there because they don't have anything to do. Like, he has nothing to say about that. Like, well, that wasn't how I saw it going down, Nancy. Sorry. So, I mean, he didn't, I don't know. I just thought it was funny. I was like, I guess they're just done now. Like but the way they leave the scene is so funny. I'm like, Wes Craven clearly was not paying attention to anything on set except Heather Langenkamp at that point. Else he would have been like, hey, maybe do that a little less ironic, guys, because the way you walk out of the room's a little abrupt. So I don't know. It's funny to me. But we do get the end, though, that Nancy realizes she has brought Freddy back into the real world. We didn't even talk about that, but in the dream, that's how all of this starts, is she, quote, brings him into the real world. That's how she's able to set him on fire in her own house.
Right.
And that, of course, is how he gets her mom. But then he gets that great scene where he comes up out of the bed and, like, splits it open from the sheets and stuff and is talking trash. He's going to kill her and all this. And then she does the Balinese dream thing, which you said a few minutes ago you thought if that happens, that's going to be really lame.
And it was.
Yes, it was.
She starts telling him, you're not real. You don't scare me. And then just turns around and he jumps at her and just kind of twinkles away.
Yeah, that is. Talk about running out of money for the effects. It's like,
and to me, it's like, if you're going to bring him back in the real world, that's not really believable to have him just vanish like that.
mm-hmm.
You brought him corporeal, and now he's just, whoop, nothing.
But see, what we realize is what happens the next morning. She wakes up and everything's fine. Now, here's the thing. The ending that we have with the Freddy top on the car and the mom mannequin getting dragged through that little window in the door and stuff. The producer, Bob Shea, is the one that said, you got to put a stinger at the end of it. We got to have that Friday the 13th last jump. We got to have that. And Craven fought him on it. And he eventually just made him do it, and he did it. But what Wes Craven wanted to happen was she walks out that morning, her and her mom have that same conversation about, yeah, I feel great, everything's great, and she just drives off with her friends, and everything's fine. And what you realize is that it was all just a nightmare. But what we're left with is that she's still inside of a nightmare, inside of another nightmare, inside of another nightmare. That's the twist ending. I'll say this. I like Craven's intention with that, is that everything is happy at the end or whatever. But I think the studio was right that, no, it needs to still be in a nightmare. That would be horrific and scary to leave us in the theater going, she's still in the nightmare. Like that's Michael is no longer on the ground after we shot him kind of moment.
Yeah, and it leaves you going, okay, well, we're ready for Act 2, right? I mean, obviously, right. Freddy's not dead by some lame ass turning your back on him. But she thinks that everyone's back and everything's fine, and yeah, not so much. And that's the end of the movie, and it leaves you going, okay, well, they've set this up for a good sequel, so let's bring it on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea is that if you're going to have a sequel and there's going to be one, let's see what we can do with it. And I thought it was smart. I do agree. I think it was a very smart way to end it, even if it was against the initial intentions or original intentions of the director and writer. I think the producer in this case is right. That you know, you got to leave something. They weren't even thinking sequels at this point. They just thought, let's leave it on a stinger because that leaves people possibly wanting more. So if this does work, then we've got somewhere to go. You know, and
absolutely,
that's the idea. But again, they weren't even thinking sequels at that point. They were just trying to figure out how can we leave people stunned in the theater. If you leave them happy and leave it to Beaver at the end, that's gonna suck. And you know what? Bob Shea was right.
Well, I don't know that it would necessarily suck, but the way that Freddy Krueger was killed and you have it end like that would have sucked.
Yes, that's what I mean. Is like that is not satisfying. What
No.
we got, I think, is.
Yeah, it definitely made up for the stupidity of the Bullholian, whatever the F that was. But I think
it's a bad finish. We can admit, like, that's a botched finish. Like that, you're not wrestling fans. Like that. That's we didn't land that last one. That last F5 lacked a little bit there. That didn't work.
You missed him completely. Yeah. So I was happy that it was that way and that's how it ended because now it leaves me ready to watch number 2. And that's kind of sad.
And I hate to tell you that there's very little of this you're going to get back in part 2, but there's some. But you know what? That's a whole other discussion on another day. We're at the point of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, popcorn ratings. Brian, what are yours for A Nightmare on Elm Street?
I got to give it a large popcorn. Yeah, dialogue is pretty lame, but the story is fun. For a horror film, I think it does a good job effectively spooking you at times and making you laugh at other times, which I think is always good in a horror film. You don't want to be scared the whole time. And I just think it's a good story and a good movie, and I think it stands the test of time. Now, we'll see as we get deeper into the series. That may not always be the case. But for this first one, I really like it, and I would recommend it.
You know, I'm with you. There's enough here that works still, 30 plus years later, that having not watched it in a long time, watching it again, I realize, man, this movie really does work. It's the best idea Wes Craven ever had. Hands down. I've seen almost everything else he's ever done, and Scream is not his. That's Kevin Williamson's baby. He just directed it, and he's a competent enough director to have not screwed up that first one. But this film, as something he created from a nightmare he had, basically, and reading some news stories about people dying in their sleep and stuff, I think really works and is incredibly effective. And yes, the acting is cheesy, and no, all the effects don't work, but enough of them do that I think it by far makes up for it. And even though the ending is a little bit of a miss on the landing, the overall performance is enough for me to go large popcorn, really strong out of the gate. But the thing that I'm going to say pushes it over to the extra large popcorn for me, Brian, are the things that are not told that I can have discussions about. Like, what made the parents go to this point to kill this guy, and what was their story, and is she still locked in the nightmare? What's still happening? All of that, to me, makes this go one level up. So I'm going to go extra large popcorn on it. And I'll say, even if you're not a big fan of horror movies, if you go back and watch this one, there's something to enjoy in it and get from it. I think there's enough here that it still works on a lot of levels. So I'm going to go extra large on it.
Very good.
All right, so we have just started our Nightmare on Elm Street series. Of course, as you already know, we're running the Friday the 13th series alongside of this. We're going to go in order of all the films except for Freddy vs. Jason. We're kind of pulling that one out of the order to end up on that one at the very end. We'll bring Ron and Brian together with me to talk about that one. Can't wait. Of course, you can find new episodes every week on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Join us on Facebook. Join our Facebook group. That's where you'll get all the notifications. Follow us on Twitter, either individually or the show's Twitter account, and you'll always get updates about the show and when it's coming out. Subscribe to us on iTunes. It'll automatically updated into your feed every week when we release these things. They're coming out 2 a week now, folks, so we hope you're enjoying the series. And if you really like it, leave us a good review on iTunes. It helps other people find the show and tell other people about it. We do appreciate your support. I know it feels like nowadays, I don't know if you feel this way, Brian, but I feel like every podcast I love nowadays is running like a Kickstarter or a Patreon and all that kind of stuff, and that's all well and good, but we do this totally for free for you guys because we like to, and for fun, and we like talking about movies. We hope you like talking about them as well. So again, join us on Facebook, join the Thabius Factor Film podcast group. That's where we do a lot of our discussions on these episodes in the group. We do appreciate your support and just for taking time to listen and join in with us. We have a lot of fun doing this show, and we hope you enjoy it as well. Until next time, for Brian, I'm Jay. Thanks for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and link up with us on Facebook. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121.